All right. Me and John Weeks are back for Rules for Radicals. How are you doing, man? How's your week been?
I'm doing very well. It's been a good week, and personally, um, despite the troubles of the world.
Yeah, the world's a mess at the moment. But what am I gonna say that's gonna change anything? I just don't even know. I was texting with Buck yesterday and I was like, look, man, I was like, sometimes I look at what's going on and I have so much to say about it, and then I go to open my mouth and no sound comes out because I'm just like, I, like, what does it even matter? You know?
I feel
So,
you. And I think it does matter. And I think your voice is important in the ecosystems that it gets heard.
well, I appreciate that. I just, I'm still just a truck driver, man. I don't think I'm that important. So, if you want lumber, I'm pretty important, but that's about it.
Yeah. I mean, if you care about a modern economy, truck driving is important.
Yep, that's
And
for sure.
also, I don't know if you've seen this, just a lot of stories about people getting hired to drive big trucks that should not be getting hired to drive big
Hmm.
trucks.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we need good men at those positions,
Well,
so as
my
not to kill
buddy,
us.
one of my good friends, Gordon McGill, just released a book called End of the Road about the decimation of the trucking industry. And he discusses um the hiring process of the trucking industry and the subsidies of the government that are going in to create this hazardous industry that used to be relatively safe when you had experienced high skilled drivers. And so he's on a book tour right now. But he was a driver. He's been a driver for over 30 years, you know. And I've had him on the show. I'm sure he's going to come on again pretty soon. We were texting last week and he's like, "When are you going to have me on again?" And I was like, "You can come on whenever you're available and I'm not at work, you're welcome to come on my show. I will move heaven and earth to make sure that happens." So, he'll be on again soon. He's been on Steve Bannon's show, and he was on Boccia a few weeks ago, right after his book came out. So
Outstanding.
he's been making the rounds, and anybody should go, excuse me, go get Gord's book, End of the Road by Gord McGill. I'm certain it's available on Amazon and anywhere else you would buy your books. So definitely go check that out and grab a copy of that and read his book. He and I, every time he comes on, all we do is bitch about the trucking industry and the ongoings of the way that the trucking industry is going, given both of us have well over 20 years experience driving truck, which is for me is hard to believe. I've been doing anything for over 20 years, let alone any specific type of job. I'm like, oh wow, I might actually know what I'm doing when it comes to driving truck. I was actually thinking about it the other day and it just registered. I started my podcast in 2018, so I'm coming up on 10 years. I'm like, geez, okay. I didn't even realize it.
You gonna throw a party like Tom Woods does?
I don't have the money Tom Woods does.
Sell tickets. I'll buy a ticket.
It'll be me and you, brother.
Hell yeah.
All right, well, let's dive into this. We're on chapter 3, A Word About Words, which will be the fourth installment because we had the prologue and then we had, um, what is it? The purpose and then of means and ends, utilitarianism. And now a word about words, which is going to be a shorter chapter than last week. Um, we got, I think next week we'll do two chapters, but we'll work that out because they're both look pretty short. So,
Sounds
but
good.
yeah, so we may knock out two chapters next week. But Okay, a word about words. The passions of mankind have boiled over into all areas of political life, including its vocabulary. The words most common in politics have become stained with human hurts, hopes, and frustrations. All of them are loaded with popular opprobrium, and their use results in a conditioned negative emotional response. Even the word politics itself, which Webster says is the science and art of government, is generally viewed in a context of corruption. Ironically, the dictionary synonyms are discreet, provident, diplomatic, wise. The same discolorations attach to other words prevalent in the language of politics, words like power, self interest, compromise, and conflict. They become twisted and warped, viewed as evil. Nowhere is the prevailing political illiteracy more clearly revealed than in these typical interpretations of words. This is why we pause here for a word about words. Power. The question may legitimately be raised: why not use other words, words that mean the same but are peaceful and do not result in such negative emotional reactions? There are a number of fundamental reasons for rejecting such substitutions. First, by using combinations of words such as harnessing the energy instead of the single word power, we begin to dilute the meaning. And as we use purifying synonyms, we dissolve the bitterness, the anguish, the hate and love, the agony and the triumph attached to these words, leaving an aseptic imitation of life. In the politics of life, we are concerned with the slaves and the Caesars, not the Vestal virgins. It is not just that, in communication, as in thought, we must ever strive towards simplicity. The masterpieces of philosophic or scientific statement are frequently no longer than a few words, for example, E equals mc squared. It is more than that. It is a determination not to detour around reality. To use any other word but power is to change the meaning of everything we are talking about. As Mark Twain once put it, the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. Power is the right word, just as self interest, compromise, and the other simple political words are, for they were conceived in and have become part of politics from the beginning of time. To pander to those who have no stomach for straight language and insist upon bland, non controversial sauces is a waste of time. They cannot or deliberately will not understand what we are discussing here. I agree with Nietzsche's statement in The Genealogy of Morals on this point. Why stroke the hypersensitive ears of our modern weaklings? Why yield even a single step to the tartuffery of words? For us psychologists, that would involve a tartuffery of action. For a psychologist today shows his good taste. Others may say his integrity in this. If anything, that he resists the shamefully moralized manner of speaking which makes all modern judgments about men and things slimy. And that is a perfect example of why reading Nietzsche is a waste of time. We approach a critical point when our tongues trap our minds. I do not propose to be trapped by tact at the expense of truth, striving to avoid the force, vigor, and simplicity of the word power. We soon become averse to thinking in vigorous, simple, honest terms. We strive to invent sterilized synonyms, cleansed of the opprobrium of the word power. But the new words mean something different, so that they tranquilize us, begin to shepherd our mental process off the main, conflict ridden, grimy, and realistic power paved highway to life, to travel down the sweeter smelling, peaceful, more socially acceptable, more respectable, indefinite byways ends in a failure to achieve an honest understanding of the issues that we must come to grips with if we are to do the job. I would ask the question when you're discussing something like this, why use the word power? Because those going into the positions of power will have that word on mind. Don't you want to curb their appetite for power? Wouldn't you rather use a word like authority? because like a legitimate authority structure, such as like a father, and I use this synonym intentionally, and compare it to fatherhood, because the father enters into the household powerful, yes, but his authority is more than just power. It's love, it's compassion, it's to steer in the right direction. And if somebody were to enter into politics, like a president, as an authority figure, um, to set an example for those of the nation, you might get better results than somebody coming into political office thinking about power.
I like that a lot. And I was thinking about, as I was reading this today, one, I really liked the metaphor of like the power paved reality of politics, because
Mm,
it's uh, government power that decides where the roads go and funds the roads, even though private companies actually make the roads.
yeah,
And then I was thinking about, well,
like dominoes.
yeah, what is power? And he's going to give some like descriptions of it. Um, but when I read books on geopolitics, they'll say things like, power is the ability to get someone to do what you want them to do, even if they don't want to do it. And so at the geopolitical level, it's when a nation can get other nations to do what it wants them to do, even when they don't want to do it. Or it's the ability to uh, deploy resources, to marshal and deploy resources. And I think something that he's missing, and that a lot of these discussions about power miss, is that there's this coalitional aspect to it. And I like to think of power as um, coalitional, proactive, selective aggression,
Mm,
including lethal aggression.
hmm.
And so when when Foucault, who is um, who is a villain in many um, many perspectives, and I empathize with that, but I like to conscript intellectuals into our cause. When he says people don't have power, they practice power, I think he's kind of getting at that.
Mm,
Or the way I like to say it is, it's not so much that there are people with power, it's that there are people within power. The power
hmm.
is that structure that they enter into. When people say that Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the world or the most powerful man in history, like what does that mean? It means that he has this high status within this coalition that can bring great aggression to bear in the world. Um, and as I was thinking about that today, I really like that description of power that I've been thinking of. But I kind of felt like something was missing. I think you're actually touching upon it with this idea of authority and the authority of the father, and that's really beautiful. I like that.
Well, the reason it came to my mind is because when you join the Orthodox Church, like, you understand what the priest is, right? You understand that the priest stands in front of the congregation and faces east, and he's looking towards God as a representative of the entire church. He has authority over the church. And so, and but with that authority comes the responsibility of taking on the struggles of the church onto his own shoulders, right? So when he's facing God, he's got to be clear in his efforts that I have appropriately taken the struggles of this church onto my shoulders, and I have not, allowed like a heresy or anything. And so they teach that as the priest is responsible for the congregation and responsible for the struggles of that church, so the father is the priest of the household. He's responsible for the struggles of that household. He's responsible for the salvation of his children and of his spouse. This is what it means to be the head of the household. It's to take on, it's the authority to take on that responsibility onto your shoulders, right? And I'm thinking this is part of the reason I would surmise that this is part of the reason that the Orthodox Church still to this day looks at the only true legitimate form of government as to be monarchy is because the king is the like kind of the priest of the nation, and through that authority takes on the struggles and sins and and the good and the bad of that nation onto his shoulders. And there's like this burden of responsibility that goes with that leadership. But if you're just saying power, like, yeah, there's that whole saying like, great with great power comes great responsibility, but not everybody takes that like to heart. And if you look at it more from a fatherhood kind of ownership kind of level, then there's just a different, there are still temptations to be abusive. I mean, it's not that there are no abusive parents or abusive clergy in the church or in families, but at the same time, there's a greater responsibility that follows with that title of authority.
This is really brilliant stuff. Um, I think a lot about the idea of legitimacy.
Mm,
And what's funny is the definition of the state that I was using for a long time, and I've been kind of like in the process of reworking in my own mind, is that the state is the organization that maintains a monopoly on the use of legitimate initiatory aggression within a given geographical area.
hmm
And I like that because obviously the state doesn't have a monopoly on aggression or a monopoly on initiatory aggression, but it's
Right.
legitimate.
Right.
And I put that in an article that I published at the Libertarian Institute. And my editor, the great Hunter DeRenzis, he put legitimate in quotation marks as if to say, you know, well, the state's um, aggression is is like not objectively legitimate in a
Mm,
certain sense, but it's like perceived as legitimate. And then it's funny is subsequent to that, I went back and I was looking at Max Weber because that's his basic definition, or by definition is kind of like synthesizing his and some other ideas.
hmm
And he puts legitimate or legitimacy in quotation marks too. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, yeah, like what does it mean to be legitimate? Does it mean that everyone thinks you're legitimate or everyone accepts that you're legitimate? Or is it something else, something deeper?
hmm
I've really been grappling with that idea.
I
Um,
think it's harder. I think it's harder for secular societies to accept legitimate roles of authority, um, because the only thing that gives legitimacy is 50 plus 50% plus one vote. And not it, no one looks at it like God has granted the authority to this government to rule, right? And so the secularization of the society in itself makes it more difficult to convince the entirety of a nation, or even the vast majority of a nation, that the rule is legitimate. It's almost like half of society always feels like there's an occupying force in DC.
Waging low key counterinsurgency against them at best.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so what's so interesting about that is I always think about like, oh, like I've been so propagandized, I've been so indoctrinated. And even though I'm someone who is aware of a lot of it and who is in conversation with people like yourself pretty consistently, pretty much like every day, I'm still always finding like new ways I've been tricked.
Right.
And one thing that I have to constantly confront is I was just raised on the worship of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
An idea that I had recently was the way that I was taught about democracy was sort of um, it was juxtaposed oftentimes with monarchy. And that was bad. No kings. Yeah. The king, that was bad. And the king, there was this thing, the divine right of kings. These kings were pretending that God underwrote their authority. But so now the authority is underwritten by the voters. So it's kind of like the people have replaced God in this narrative,
Mm-hmm.
where the I mean the politicians will still invoke God, but they'll invoke the people the way that I was taught the ancient kings would invoke God. Like, I have a mandate from the American people. They elected me, supermajority, and the opinion polls show that they want me to do this, and that's why I'm doing it, and that's why it's right for me to be doing it. Like, they seem to invoke that a lot more than they would like God. And when they do invoke God, it's like very superficial.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, look, I represent God and I represent you to God, the way you were just describing the priest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and there's also this complete contradiction whenever people talk about democracy. They're like, "Oh, we have to preserve our democracy." And then the next sentence out of their mouth is, "We're flooded with white nationalism or anti-Semitism." I'm like, "So you want the white nationalists and the anti-Semites to choose your government for you?" Like, I don't understand. Like, it makes no sense to me.
They want managed democracy.
Yeah. Well, because when they talk about our democracy, they're not talking about actual democracy. They're talking about their prescribed formula for moving the country in the direction they want to move it. So anytime a right winger wins, the progressives, uh, their democracy is under attack. And anytime a left winger wins, the right winger's democracy is under attack. It doesn't matter. It's never going to satiate the hunger for for reaching truth and for seeking out truth, because they think truth is something that they shape through their opinions.
I think it was John Kerry in the aftermath of the Egyptian military canceling the Arab Spring using live ammunition and um, putting a military dictatorship back in place. He said, it's the restoration of Egyptian democracy. And I think Hillary Clinton had a similar line about like the birth of democracy, um, maybe in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they'll talk like that. If the people that they want to win the election, then it's we secure democracy or it's the birth of democracy or the
It's a
restoration of
legitimate
democracy.
election. Yeah.
It's a legitimate election. And if the people they don't want to win, yeah, it's terrorism. It's the election was rigged. It's the death of democracy. It's the end of democracy. And that's
Well,
how they talk. And they've talked about Trump.
yeah. Well, because they don't believe that there's anything wrong with their thought patterns, so they don't have to question their own priors. They're above and beyond reproach when it comes to opinions and politics, because they know they're the managerial class. They understand and they know how to move forward their programs, and they think their programs are the solution. Whatever the solution to whatever problem they are trying to um, address, they have the solution. They are the managerial class, and they don't need the midwits and the deplorables to get in there and ruin their plans. What they need is for the midwits and the deplorables to go back to sleep. And no matter what you think about Trump and his ability to govern and the decisions he makes, the one thing that Trump did do is he woke up all the people that piss off the managerial class, which is hilarious to me. And so, I mean, if nothing else, I find it funny that they are in a tailspin based upon based upon the majority telling them no, just because you think that you are always correct doesn't mean you're always correct. And so as people question the priors of the managerial class is out there thrashing and in fighting against the torrent of wave that's coming at them. And it's hilarious. And it's like, okay, well, this is what you get because you were never in it to move the country in a better direction. You were in it to shape the country in your image. So we can get back to reading. I can rant on shit like that for days.
Well, let me just conclude though by saying I really like this distinction between power and authority. And that I'm thinking now, like when people say they're all about power or he has a lot of power, yeah, they're referring to how high can I rise in this apparatus of power. But if they were to say, focus on authority, how how can I take on a responsibility
Right.
to make things better within this system as it is? It is a system of power. It is a system of coalitional aggression. But I'm not focused on my own rise in it as my primary objective.
Mm.
And there's a book, I haven't read it.
You said that perfectly. It's like one focuses on self-service and the other focuses on public service.
Yeah, 100%. There's a book, I think it's called like something about like storming the phalanx or like crossing the phalanx. And it's like, I thought it was like a military book. I thought it was about like this is how you win battles.
Mm.
But then I looked at it and it was like, what it was actually about, what it was actually about, Tommy, was like, this is how you like rise up in the military, uh, um, like pyramidal structure.
Mm.
So like as if like that. I thought that was hilarious, and then I didn't read it. But I think, oh, it's funny. It's not about like this
It's
is
like
how
the
you,
politics of military.
yeah. And it reminded me of like when like some general from like the army will be like, y'all think the enemy is North Koreans, but no, the enemy is the Air Force because they're competing for the same funding that we are.
Mm.
So when you're like in those positions of power and that and you're thinking about rising up, and then you're thinking of like the other branch, the military is like the enemy, and you're thinking of just your own self-aggrandizement as like the mission. Yeah, it makes sense that when you actually do go to war, it's a complete disaster.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, okay.
Back at it.
Let's see if we can get back on track. Like I said, I can rant on stuff like that for hours. Let us look at the word power. Power meaning ability, whether physical, mental, or moral, to act, has become an evil word with overtones and undertones that suggest the sinister, the unhealthy, the Machiavellian. It suggests a phantasmagoria. You just got to use weird Greek in here, don't you? Of the nether regions. The moment the word power is mentioned, it is as though hell had been opened, exuding the stench of the devil's cesspool of corruption. It evokes images of cruelty, dishonesty, selfishness, arrogance, dictatorship, and abject suffering. The word power is associated with conflict. It is unacceptable in our present Madison Avenue deodorized hygiene, where controversy is blasphemous and the value is being liked and not offending others. Power in our minds has become almost synonymous with corruption and immorality. Whenever the word power is mentioned, somebody sooner or later will refer to the classical statement of Lord Acton and cite it as follows: power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In fact, the correct quotation is power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We can't even read Acton's statement accurately. Our minds are so confused by our conditioning. The corruption of power is not in power, but in ourselves. And yet, what is this power which men live by and to a significant degree live for? Power is the very essence, the dynamo of life. It is the power of the heart pumping blood and sustaining life in the body. It is the power of active citizen participation pulsing upward, providing a unified strength for a common purpose. That should be Anne. Power is an essential life force always in operation, either changing the world or opposing change. Power or organized energy may be a man killing explosive or a life saving drug. The power of a gun may be used to enforce slavery or to achieve freedom. The power of the human brain can create man's most glorious achievements and develop perspectives and insights into the nature of life opening horizons previously beyond the imagination. The power of the human mind can also devise philosophies and ways of life that are destructive for the future of mankind. Either way, power is the dynamo of life. Alexander Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, put it this way: what is a power but the ability or faculty of doing a thing? What is the ability to do a thing but the power of employing the means necessary to its execution? Pascal, who was definitely not a cynic, observed that justice without power is impotent. Power without justice is tyranny. St. Ignatius, hey, that's ours, the founder of the Jesuit order, did not shrink from the that's the other Saint Ignatius. Shrink from the recognition of power when he issued his dictum: to do a thing well, a man needs power and competence. We could call the roll of all who have played their parts in history and find the word power, not a substitute word, used in their speech and writings. It is impossible to conceive of a world devoid of power. The only choice of concepts is between organized and unorganized power. Mankind has progressed only through learning how to develop and organize instruments of power in order to achieve order, security, morality, and civilized life itself, instead of a sheer struggle for physical survival. Every organization known to man, from government down, has had only one reason for being, that is, organization for power in order to put into practice or promote its common purpose. When we talk about a person's lifting himself by his own bootstraps, we are talking about power. Power must be understood for what it is, for the part it plays in every area of our life. If we are to understand it and thereby grasp the essentials of relationships and functions between groups and organizations, particularly in a pluralistic society, to know power and not fear it is essential to its constructive use and control. In short, life without power is death. A world without power would be a ghostly wasteland and a dead planet. Self interest.
Can I say first?
Yes.
He has that line about essentially like I'm uh, paraphrasing, but like the problem isn't with power itself. The problem is with us,
Mm-hmm.
with the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, he's coming at it with this secular atheist frame of reference, but in in a Christian frame of reference, that would be like yeah, okay, sure, like people are sinners, they're fallen, there's original sin.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's like this kind of subtle implicit assumption that he's making that like government itself is good and it's just bad people that screw it up. When perhaps in reality, he doesn't want to detour around reality. So let's not detour around reality. When you do a job, that job changes you,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
People stories about people who work in slaughterhouses and they slowly become different and they they start drinking more. They start getting into fights with their wives more. People, you know, they become a police officer because they want to do good and their father was a police officer and like a month later they're like arresting a guy in front of his children over domestic when they feel like I shouldn't be doing this. Like we should have done something different. But the protocol said we got the call, had to do it. And you keep doing that, it's going to change who you are. So if you get a job within a massive apparatus of power, like the US national government or just your local sheriff's office, like that's going to have an effect on anyone.
Mm.
And like he does not seem to be like acknowledging that at all.
Hmm. I was you bringing up a police officer that makes that had me thinking. The other day I was thinking a lot of the guys that I go to church with are police officers or formerly police officers. And one of the things I was kind of wrestling with the other day was I was thinking about them and the job that they do, knowing that many of them have had violent interactions with criminals. And and I was like, there's this interesting kind of dynamic, this that's like it's almost like a contradiction in what you do for a living based upon in what you believe, right? And wrestling that dynamic has to be so difficult, you know. I mean, we're already such contradictory creatures as it is going through life. And I can find many times where I've been, some sort of hypocrite, in a minor sense, not like affecting other people's lives, but it affects me. And then ultimately that hypocrisy kind of breeds inside me. And then I have to start, I either have to repent, which is the hard thing to do, which is what we're called to do, is repent of these contradictions of our sins, of our hypocrisies, or I have to justify it. And it's so much easier to begin to justify the contradictions in your own life that it slowly but surely um, fogs what we in the Orthodox Church would call the nous, which is kind of like the eye of the soul, and it makes it more difficult on a day in day out basis to identify like the what one might call the Christian good as opposed to the worldly good. And if we're doing good in the world from the lens of the world, from a secular lens, we could still be doing bad in the sight of God. And it makes it much more difficult to identify that.
Well said. This man, Alinsky is a clouder of the noose.
Yes, for sure. And it's because I mean, if you look at the term noose and think about it in in the terms that the East talks about it, it is not even something on the radar of those of us in the West. Like we don't grow up with this concept. What we think is good is what we see, what we feel, what we taste, what we hear. We don't understand that there are senses beyond the physical senses of our being. And this is where Orthodox Christianity has really spoken to me, is because through the worship of Orthodox Christianity, it engages all your five senses into the liturgy, so that you are exercising those senses in order to wake up that noose and to clear the vision of your soul and spirit. And I think in the West we just don't have language for that.
That's so interesting you say that because I have a friend, brilliant, brilliant guy, um, like classically trained intellectual, but has run businesses, is not in academia anymore. And he said to me once, he's like, in the West, there's just this obsession with vision.
Mm.
even like intellectuals interacting with like scent. You don't see a lot of that.
Right.
And that always kind of stuck with me. And I would notice that. And I would like we have a saying, seeing is believing. Now,
Hmm.
to be sure, we say things like that doesn't pass the smell test or I smell a rat. But usually it's all about seeing is believing. And so even with the five senses, it's been reduced to the vision. And like biologists will tell you that our brains are built primarily around that sense. So it makes sense why we would do that.
Hmm.
But then there's like this whole other reality beyond our senses that even like a secular atheist physicist will talk about. And so that's so fascinating that that idea of the noose.
I'm trying to find something that Buck just published today. I'm sorry, I am listening to you, but what you just brought it up to my attention made me think of it. He published it on his Substack. Let me see, where is it? There it is. It's called it's a short piece. Buck writes these short pieces on Substack. They're usually take you 2-3 minutes to read. I haven't read this one yet, but the the title did catch my eye earlier. It's The Beauty of the Icon, the Lie of the Idol. A culture without icons doesn't become neutral, it becomes idolatrous. So, and that's really speaking to the orthodox phronema or mindset, because iconography is such a huge part of our our experience, whether it's in the liturgy or at home. I'm like, I look right now above the window. I have a window directly in front of me so I can look outside, but directly above the window I have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine icons, all depicting different portions of scripture. So I have, most of them include Jesus uh, in one way. There's the Jesus, the archpriest. There's there's Christ, Mary, um, Gabriel, the archangel Gabriel, um, the Last Judgment, Christ on the throne, Christ praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Pentecost. So it's such a huge part of our interaction, our experience with God, that we always have these images around us. I mean, there's an icon right there. I don't know if you can see it. That's usually hanging in my kitchen, but I was painting the kitchen and I haven't brought it back in. But that's the hospitality of Abraham. I mean, it's such a massive part of our experience, being Orthodox and engaging and living the Orthodox life. Is just, we see, you can get on Twitter any day of the week and you can look at pornography, and there was a one of the saints called pornography the icon of the devil. But you can look at pornography or any number of things. You can see murders, you can see beheadings, um, but so we really believe that part of our spiritual walk is surrounding ourselves with these icons telling the story of Christ, that we need to be able to look upon that and see that as a window into heaven, to remind us every day where our focus should be.
I like that piece that you read by Buck. And it made me think of a line from G.K. Chesterton, something like when people don't believe in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything.
Mm, yes, yes.
And like when I first heard that, I was like, man, that is hilarious. Like I know so many people like that. They'll be like, there's no God. And then they believe in UFOs, ghosts, the crystals,
Yeah.
diversity, just anything. And and unquestioningly, Um, the icon thing is interesting because like I'm like going back to like college history, learning about the 12th century or something, but there was like that's like a big deal between
The iconoclast. Yeah.
I was raised in the Catholic Church.
Right.
And so there was like and I'm just like I don't know what I'm talking about. This is just like my experience of like coming across this knowledge, but there was like beef between different religious groups about icons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in like the Catholic Church, there's maybe a different perspective on icons. I'm not saying I don't know, maybe they're anti-icon, although it's like pretty iconic when you're in one of those churches.
There, we'll see. The Western art um, of the Catholic Church, the Latins, they went to more statuary, whereas the East continued along with the icons. So it's like a painting, like a flat picture. Hold on, I'll show you this one. So it's a
Okay.
yeah. So the Western Church, the Catholic Church, they went more to statuary. And so you'll see more like uh but even still in Rome, I mean, if you look up in the dome, there's iconography all up in there. Even in the Capitol, uh DC, there's up in the dome, there's iconography. They have George Washington painted up in heaven with the angels, right? Like, I mean, there's iconography all over the place. It's just what do you look at it as, right? I remember reading this excellent book. I did until I became Orthodox. It didn't hit me what it was, what he was getting at. But it was a Clive Barker book. Of course, I got to mention Clive Barker at least once a month on my podcast because I read all his horror novels when I was younger. I just loved them. And he had a book called Cold Heart Canyon, and it's about this Romanian guy who's this famous actor in California. Um, but he's from a Romanian family, and he goes back to Romania to visit like a castle that was I think it was in his family. It's been a long time since I read the book, but anyway, in one of the rooms, the whole room was made of tiles, and I would think like maybe like 4 inch by 4 inch tiles or whatever. But these tiles, there were paintings on all these tiles depicting different scenes, and they were going to tear down the castle. So he paid a contractor to come in and deconstruct this room full of tiles and bring it ship it over to California, and he built a direct replica of that room in his basement, and he would go into this room and be transported to other worlds, and it was all violence and killing, and basically what it was like it was like a horror kind of style, almost like an antichrist kind of iconography that was happening within these tiles. It was icons though. Basically, it was just icons of destruction and death as opposed to icons of life is basically what was happening. And it wasn't until becoming Orthodox and understanding iconography and kind of, and I can't even say I understand it completely, but kind of like developing the eye for it and the taste for iconography that I was able to kind of discern what was being done within that novel, what Clive Barker was doing within that novel. There's nothing Christian about anything Clive Barker does. So I am not by any stretch of the imagination saying get any of your theology from Clive Barker.
There's great a taste for iconography.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It took me a while. It really did, because I was raised Baptist, you know, Southern Baptist and non-denominational, so it really wasn't in my vocabulary. Like our walls were white, you know. But I now it's just like, oh wow, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. Is when I see icons, I love to examine them and look at them and gain some sort of a peace from knowing the story behind each icon. So we'll go from iconography to self-interest now, which is a weird
Let's do it.
transition, but we got to do it. We have goals to meet. Self-interest, like power, wears the black shroud of negativism and suspicion. To many, the synonym for self-interest is selfishness. The word is associated with a repugnant conglomeration of vices such as narrowness, self-seeking, and self-centeredness. Everything that is opposite to the virtues of altruism and selflessness. The common definition is contrary, of course, to our everyday experiences, as well as to the observations of all great students of politics and life. The myth of altruism as a motivating factor in our behavior could arise and survive only in a society bundled in the sterile gauze of New England Puritanism and Protestant morality, and tied together with the ribbons of Madison Avenue public relations. It is one of the classic American fairy tales. From the great teachers of Judeo Christian morality,
Oh
and
no.
I hate that
That's a
word.
category violation, Tommy. Tell them what they want.
It is, and I hate it. It drives me crazy. And the
That is
philosophy
like when I was saying that I grew up on the propaganda of democracy. I also grew up in the propaganda of Judeo-Christian.
of dispensationalism,
And I was in a Catholic church, but it was just part of the culture. Like
right? Yeah, is part of the culture. Yeah.
it's like, look, our nation our founding fathers created a system of government that is essentially Athenian democracy housed within Roman republicanism, underwritten by Judeo Christian values. I
I've
believe that shit.
I've done a podcast with Father John Whiteford of St. Jonah's in Spring, Texas. I did a podcast with him in 2024 on dispensationalism. Buck has done, I think, two podcasts with him about dispensationalism. Like Father John Whiteford is great on this subject because he grew up Baptist, grew up Southern Baptist. I mean, he's from East Texas. He talks like a real redneck. Great guy. I love the man. And yeah, like that's one of those things that you had to, you had to break. I had to break my mind free of dispensationalism. Now I see it and it just drives me nuts. I hate it. I'm just like, oh my gosh, why would anybody even say this? It makes no sense to me, but it's like you said, it's the culture. It's in the culture. It's in the blood flow of the culture. And if you even take just a few minutes to like really think about it, it makes no sense. But it's just been said for so long, you know. It's like it's like that first time I heard Tom Woods point out that when you walk into a elementary classroom and they have the presidents on the wall, how much different it would look if it were the CEOs of Walmart instead of the presidents of the United States. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever.
The founder of Walmart could not tell a lie.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And what's funny to get to call back to the idea of not believing in God and then you believe in everything. Or what Buck said, like this idea that religion is just there to trick you.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. And that's basically, I think, what Saul Alinsky would say. But he is directly throwing shade at Madison Avenue.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, that's not religion. So you're telling me that,
It's his religion.
yeah. But it's like, um, that people are constantly trying to trick you with TV shows and movies and advertising and politics. That's constantly going on. But the one place where you sort of zero in and think that's going on is religion. And then the one place where you think it's not going on is government.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's really strange the way that things have gotten twisted in our minds and the propaganda. I mean, it's like that old saying, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing the world he didn't exist, right? Because in ancient times, there was
Master Jose.
if you go back 2000, 3000 years, there was no such thing as an atheist. That was not an idea. Like people, like they may not have all worshiped, the what we call the Christian God, Christ and the God of the Bible, but they were worshiping some sort of God, and they all knew it. They had idols, and they believed that they breathed life into these idols, and there were all kinds of rituals that they would go through to make sure that these idols looked over their villages or their cities, and there was never any kind of idea that there was no God. That is
Have
a
you seen the movie The
really
Northman?
new. What is it?
It's called The Northman.
Mm-mm.
You gotta see it.
Okay.
I highly recommend it. But
Okay.
it's about, yeah, it's about like the Vikings and a
Mhm.
son trying to avenge his father. It's awesome.
I
But
love the show Vikings. That show
I have
was
not
awesome.
seen that. My
That
wife
show was
loves those
awesome, dude.
shows. She loves those shows. So I've seen like scenes.
Yeah.
Um, but I forget the actor's name. It's like something Skarsgård. He plays like the main character, the Viking, the Northman.
Mhm.
And I saw an interview with him where he was promoting the film. And it was cool because he was talking about how they really wanted to be authentic about how they portrayed people of that time and their interaction with family and politics and the gods.
Mhm.
And he said, yeah, in this time, there's no such thing as an atheist. And that was the first time that I came across that idea. And it was cool how he was saying it. Like, when someone says something and it's like, there's just the way they say it, it's true.
Yeah.
Like, he's not trying to trick you. He's just like, yeah, we did our research for
Yeah.
this film. Yeah, there's no such thing as an atheist in these times. And I thought
I will
that was
I will warn anybody that wants to go back and read Norse mythology. All the Norse mythology that has been preserved to today was written by Christians, and a lot of it is mocking Norse mythology in its storytelling. So even what you read today, as far as like the Norse gods and where they believe the gods came from, I think it was like a cow licking a block of ice, and gods would transform out of this. Like this was, you have to be careful because some of it might be true, but some of it might have just been the Christians of the time that were interpreting the writings, making fun of the Norse religion. So just do with that what you will if you're a fan of Norse mythology.
it's a good FYI public service announcement, kids.
So, yeah. And if you want to know more about that, watch Lord of Spirits. Don't listen to me because they know much more than I do about that. But all right. From the great teachers of Judeo Christian morality and the philosophers to the economists and to the wise observers of the politics of man, there has always been universal agreement on the part that self interest plays as a prime moving force in man's behavior. The importance of self interest has never been challenged, it has been accepted as an inevitable fact of life. In the words of Christ, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Aristotle said, in politics, everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly ever of the public interest. Excuse me. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations noted that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard of their own interest. We addressed ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self love, and never talked to them of our own necessities, but of their advantage. In all the reasoning found in the Federalist Papers, no point is so central and agreed upon as rich and poor alike are prone to act upon impulse rather than pure reason and to narrow conceptions of self interest. To question the force of self interest that pervades all areas of political life is to refuse to see man as he is, to see him only as we would like him to be. And yet, next to this acceptance of self interest, there are certain observations I would like to make. Machiavelli, with whom the idea of self interest seems to have gained its greatest notoriety, at least among those who are unaware of the tradition, said, this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, fake, cowardly, covetous. As long as you succeed, they are yours entirely. They will offer you their blood, property, life, and children when the need is far distant. But when it approaches, they turn against you. But Machiavelli makes a more mortal mistake when he rules out the moral factors of politics and holds purely to self interest as he defines it. This mistake can only be accounted for on the basis that Machiavelli's experience as an active politician was not too great, for otherwise he could not have overlooked the obvious fluidity of every man's self interest. The overall case must be of larger dimensions than that of self interest narrowly defined. It must be large enough to include and provide for the shifting dimensions of self interest. You may appeal to one self interest to get me to the battlefront to fight, but once I am there, my prime self interest becomes to stay alive. And if we are victorious, my self interest may, and usually does, dictate entirely unexpected goals rather than those I had before the war.
May I
For
interject?
go ahead.
That jumped out to me as not true. Where he's saying that um, once he gets to the front, that his prime self interest is going to become to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, and I don't know, but as far as I know, Alinsky didn't have military experience. Um, but I know a lot of guys that did, and I know a lot of guys that have combat experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read about it, talked to people about it, thought about it. I don't have military experience, but it seems like if if the primary self interest was to stay alive, then they would just leave. They would just desert. They don't. And there's this like, I don't even know if it's really like necessarily at the level of like a trope in military films. I feel like it is, but that might just be my own misrecognition. But there's a scene like this in the film Black Hawk Down
Mm-hmm.
where the older soldier is talking to the younger soldier and he's like, let me tell you something, boy. That first bullet flies past your head. God, country, family, apple pie goes out the window. And the only thing that matters is the man to your left and the man to your right. And I remember like watching that as a kid and being like, what the fuck? Like, that's what's not about the mission and like the country. It's about just the guy next to you. It's all then why don't you leave? Just get on a plane and go home. And then I had that perspective for many years. And then having talked to more people and like read more, I was like, oh, I think part of it is like the only way to generate that brotherhood, that deep brotherhood is through the combat. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the whole point.
Yep.
And so, I mean, I think we have the empirical data that guys get sent to war and they don't put their like life as their primary self interest. They sacrifice themselves for each other. They risk their lives. The fact that they stay there and fight means they're not putting their life as the primary like self interest. And almost like it jumped out that line like jumped out at me like so hard as false that I was almost like, oh, like if I wasn't reading this with Tommy, I might even just like stop reading it right here because I'm
Mm.
so like turned off at this moment.
Right. Yeah.
This man's leading me astray.
Well, if you look at where the education system came from, it was for that reason that you're speaking about right there, is because whenever the Prussians, I think they were invading France or something like that, and as soon as the bullets start flying, the fighting started. Like most of the army like evacuated. They just left. They're like, no. So then you had the Prussian education system was to train from a young age to be a good citizen so that people would die for their nation. But ultimately they did determine that it's not the nation that they're willing to die for, but their brothers. And so when you go through basic training, which I've never been in combat, but I have been through basic training, they are training you not necessarily, yeah, I mean, they're training you to be soldiers. But for the most part, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get everybody in the platoon to hate one person, or the or we had three drill sergeants, but to hate the drill sergeant so much that they won't abandon each other. That if one guy is having issues like with PT or rucking or whatever it may be, that his brothers are there to pick him up and get him across the finish line. And that's what it boils down to. You become that brotherhood. That brotherhood becomes real. And
Which branch were you in, Tommy?
I was in the army.
I'm really fascinated um by reading about basic training and talking to like guys that went through it and guys that were drill instructors
Mm-hmm.
and breaking it down. I have a friend who's a combat marine and he was a drill instructor. And he told me that like basic training was brutal, but the training they sent him to be a drill instructor was like even like twice as brutal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he said, and this is funny, I don't know if this is an analogous thing to what you experienced in the army, but he said that in the basic training for the Marines, and they're all about the number three. They're obsessed with the number three. And like the whole organization is structured on the number three. There basically were like three guys in charge of like the group of recruits. He had the position where he could only yell at them. And he's instructed to be aggressive,
Mm-hmm.
to be like amped up, and to not say a lot. Then there's uh, a guy whose job is to
The cool
like
one.
do what's that?
The cool one.
Yeah, the cool one.
Yep.
This guy is making yeah. No, it's like right. And I was like, oh, dude,
Good
like they're
cop, bad
playing.
cop.
Yeah, they're playing, and I portrayed. I like interpret it as like, oh, they're playing with like the mother and father archetypes because
Mm.
like there's the guy that's supposed to make sure that you go to like the doctor if you're sick and you get your checkups and you
Mm-hmm.
get all that stuff. Kind of, I was like, oh, it's kind of like the mother, and he like recoiled and was like, ah, fucking hope not. It's all father, right? It's all fathers in the Marines. But so it was like there was him. He could only yell at the guys. Then there was another guy above him who sometimes he would yell at the guys. Maybe he had to yell at the guys sometimes, but he would not always yell at them. And there's a third guy who never yells. I was like, man, this is like who made this up? This is like just genius.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this. Have you seen the movie Full Metal Jacket?
Yeah.
So you know there's a scene where the infamous bathroom scene
Mm-hmm.
where the guy shoots the drill instructor.
Yep.
So I have a friend who went through Air Force basic training, and I don't know if this is like if it's like this in all the branches now, but I like to think it is. But he told me that like when he and this is like maybe like 5 to 8 years ago, he was in basic training for the Air Force. That at first, the first few weeks, it's exactly what you described. It's like there's that dude that everyone's gonna hate. He's so mean to you. But then like maybe 12 weeks in, uh you do like firearms training. And on
Mm-hmm.
that day, they put you on a bus and they drive you to the other side of the Air Force base where you meet new drill instructors who are super nice and super respectful. And then they hand you a loaded weapon. And I was like, oh man, they should have done that in Full Metal Jacket. That was insane. And I was like, is that how they used to do it? Did they change that up? Is it now like totally different people like do the weapons training? And then I
When I
read
was in, it
about
was the same drill sergeants.
it was the same. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's just commitment. And like, um, I read a thing about the Marines, and I don't know how the Marines do it. I should ask my friend. I call him up. But the guy was basically, regardless of like who's giving you the loaded weapon, the guy that was mean to you or new people, like when they give you the gun, they're not being mean to you. And it's like the way he described it is like you've been like broken down and like rebuilt and like demeaned, humiliated, and all this stuff. And now you're learning that like behind the rifle is the safe place.
Mm.
I was like, man, this is like one of the most like just brilliant indoctrination systems it's like ever been. If a private if a private organization was doing this, we would call it a cult.
Oh yeah.
And I said this to our colleague Keith Knight. I was like, I understand why people want to call like the Marines a cult. I don't like doing that 100% because it's almost like we just call anything a cult. It's
Hmm.
obviously different than like what we think of pejoratively as cults, you know? And he kind of like got me to think about it a little differently because he was like, well, what if like the people that work for Charles Manson were like, we were ordered to do this by our superior officer. He had classified information. I was like, touche, motherfucker.
He was involved with CIA operations, so he might have had classified information. Yeah, I know. Just just an aside, shout out to Drill Sergeant Brantley, who had us uh, singing War Pigs during our 5 mile runs. So that was awesome. So,
That's great. Man, the
yep.
contradictions of the humanity.
Yes, yes, it was awesome though. It was awesome. He would also rap, but I didn't know the rap songs that he was singing, but I knew War Pigs. And when he did Creeping Death, I knew Creeping Death by Metallica. So,
That's awesome.
so yep. All right. For example, the United States in World War II fervently allied with Russia against Germany, Japan, and Italy, and shortly after victory, fervently allied with its former enemies, Germany, Japan, and Italy, against its former ally, the USSR. These drastic shifts of self interest can be rationalized only under a huge, limitless umbrella of general moral principles such as liberty, justice, freedom, a law higher than man made law, and so on. Morality, so called, becomes the continuum of self interest shifts. Within this morality, there appears to be a tearing conflict, probably due to the layers of inhibition in our kind of moralistic civilization. It appears shameful to admit that we operate on the basis of naked self interest, so we desperately try to reconcile every shift of circumstances that is to our self interest in terms of a broad moral justification or rationalization. With one breath, we point out that we are utterly opposed to communism, but that we love the Russian people. Loving people is in keeping with the tenets of our civilization. What we hate is the atheism and the suppression of the individual that we attribute as characteristics sustaining the immorality of communism. On this, we base our powerful opposition. We do not admit the actual fact, our own self interest. We proclaimed all of these negative, diabolical Russian characteristics just prior to the Nazi invasion of Russia. The Soviets were then the cynical despots who connived in the non aggression pact with Hitler, the ruthless invaders who brought disaster to the Poles and the Finns. They were a people in chains and in misery, held in slavery by a dictator's might. They were a people whose rulers so distrusted him that the Red Army was not permitted to have live ammunition because they might turn their guns against the Kremlin. All this was our image. But within minutes of the invasion of Russia by the Nazis, when self interest dictated that the defeat of Russia would be disastrous to our interests, then suddenly they became the gallant, great, warm, loving Russian people. The dictator became the benevolent and loving Uncle Joe. The Red Army soon was filled with trust and devotion to its government, fighting with an unparalleled bravery and employing a scorched earth policy against the enemy. The Russian allies certainly had God on their side, after all. He was on ours. On our June 1941 shift was more dramatic and sudden than our shift against the Russians shortly after the defeat of our common enemy. In both cases, our self interest was disguised as the banners of freedom, liberty, and decency were unveiled, first against the Nazis and 6 years later against the Russians. In our present relationship with Tito and the Yugoslavian communists, then the issue is not that Tito represents communism, but that he is not part of the Russian power alignment. Here we take the position we took after the Nazi invasion, where suddenly communism became, well, after all, it's their way of life, and we believe in the right of self determination, and it's up to the Russians to have the government they like, as long as they are on our side and do not threaten our self interest. Two, there is no question that with all our denunciation of the Red Chinese, if they announced that they were no longer a part of the world communist conspiracy or alignment of forces, they would be overnight acceptable to us, acclaimed by us, and provided with all kinds of aid just so long as they were on our side. In essence, what we are saying is that we do not care what kind of communist you are so long as you do not threaten our self interest. Quick aside, I will be doing an episode coming up probably after Lent because Lent has been quite the struggle this year. And But I will be doing an episode after Lent on a piece by Saint Hilarion Troitsky, who lived under the Soviet Union, called Christianity and Socialism. And another quick aside, shout out to Saint Gabriel of Georgia, who burnt the posters of Lenin while under the Soviet Union. So, just a quick aside to those Russian Orthodox over there that were fighting the good fight against communism. Let me give you an example of what I mean by some of the differences between the world as it is and the world as we would like it to be. Recently, after lecturing at Stanford University, I met a Soviet professor of political economics from the University of Leningrad. The opening of our conversation was illustrative of the definitions and outlook of those who live in the world as it is. The Russian began by asking me, "Where do you stand on communism?" I replied, "That's a bad question, since the real question is, assuming both of us are operating in and thinking of the world as it is, whose communists are they, yours or ours? If they are ours, then we are all for them. If they are yours, obviously we are against them. Communism itself is irrelevant. The issue is whether they are on our side or yours. Now, if you Russians didn't have a first mortgage on Castro, we would be talking about Cuba's right to self determination and the fact that you couldn't have a free election until after there had been a period of education following the repression of the dictatorship of Batista. As a matter of fact, if you should start trying to push for a free election in Yugoslavia, we might even send over our Marines to prevent this kind of sabotage. The same goes if you should try to do it in Formosa. The Russian came back with, "What is your definition of a free election outside of your country?" I said, "Well, our definition of a free election in, say, Vietnam is pretty much what your definition is in your satellites. If we've got everything so set that we are going to win, then it's a free election. Otherwise, it's bloody terrorism. Isn't that your definition?" The Russians' reaction was, "Well, yes, more or less." We repeatedly get caught in this conflict between our professed moral principles and the real reasons why we do things, to wit, our self interest. We are always able to mask those real reasons in words of beneficent goodness, freedom, justice, and so on. Such tears as appear in the fabric, such tears. I don't know why I'm having issues right now. I'm like rolling over my own tongue. Such tears as appear in the fabric of this moral masquerade sometimes embarrass us. It is interesting that the communists do not seem to concern themselves with these moral justifications for their naked act of self interest. In a way, this becomes embarrassing too. It makes us feel that they may be laughing at us, knowing well that we are motivated by self interest too, but are determined to disguise it. We feel that they may be laughing at us as they struggle in the sea of world politics stripped to their shorts, while we flop around fully dressed in our white tie and tails. And yet, with all this, there is that wondrous quality of man that from time to time floods over the natural dams of survival and self interest. We witnessed it in the summer of 1964 when white college students risked their lives to carry the torch of human freedom into darkest Mississippi. An earlier instance, George Orwell describes his self interest in entering the trenches during the Spanish Civil War as a matter of trying to stop the spreading horror of fascism. Yet once he was in the trenches, his self interest changed to the goal of getting out alive. Still, I have no question that if Orwell had been given a military assignment from which he could easily have got lost, he would not have wandered to the rear at the price of jeopardizing the lives of some of his comrades. He would never have pursued his self interest. These are the exceptions to the rule, but there have been enough of them flashing through the murky past of history to suggest that these episodic transfigurations of the human spirit are more than the flash of fireflies. Compromise. Compromise is another word that carries shades of weakness, vacillation, betrayal of ideals, surrender of moral principles. In the old culture, when virginity was a virtue, one referred to a woman's being compromised. The word is generally regarded as ethically unsavory and ugly, but to the organizer, compromise is a key and beautiful word. It is always present in the pragmatics of operation. It is making the deal, getting that vital breather, usually the victory. If you start with nothing, demand 100%, then compromise for 30%. You're 30% ahead. A free and open society is an ongoing conflict, interrupted periodically by compromises, which then become the start for the continuation of conflict, compromise, and on ad infinitum. Control of power is based on compromise in our Congress and among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. A society devoid of compromise is totalitarian. If I had to define a free and open society in one word, the word would be compromise. What's funny about this is, like, if you look at it from a Christian perspective and you look at compromise from a Christian perspective, that's how you fall into heresies. That's how you fall into the grips of evil, is by compromising on the values and the virtues of Christianity. And that's how you fall into sin, is through compromise. And so we spend our entire lives through a Christian worldview in getting rid of the compromises that we naturally make with ourselves to pursue the passions, which he talks about early on in the chapter. The first sentence is talking about the human passions and feeding these human passions. And so all he's telling you how to do is feed your passions and forego your life of virtue and morality in order to reach pleasures of the flesh.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You had said something similar in a previous episode that we did about how he needs to, and revolutionaries like him need to get the audience to abandon hope so that they can get them to accept their ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had thought about how I'm working on this book for the Institute, and I'm really into the short little quotes before each chapter. Epigrams, I believe the kids call them, or epigraphs. And for a while, this is like when I first started working on it a couple of years ago, I was gonna make the opening quote, that line from Dante, "Abandon all hope."
Mm.
And I ran that by a friend who she's a secular atheist professor, but she was like, "No, don't use that quote." And I was like, "Okay." And like at the time, I was like, well, I was gravitating toward that quote because I was really depressed about the the horrors that I was seeing, that I was reading about, and like the ability of people around me to justify them and to go along with them and to willfully misunderstand what I'm saying, you
Hmm.
know. But now I realize, or now I have a different perspective, which I was like, well, also I'm trying to push like my perspective. So if I can get my audience to like abandon hope, if I can break them down that much,
Hmm.
then I can fill them with my ideas.
Right.
So I was like, oh wow, I wasn't like consciously thinking that,
Hmm.
but I was just sort of
But you were starting
naturally,
a cult.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So well, now I'm not trying to do that. But
Yeah.
it's so easy. It's so
You'd be a
easy to
great
do
cult
that.
leader, though. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. But like, yeah, it's like you get them to abandon hope and you get them to sort of revel in their baser animal
Hmm.
nature, in their senses, in their pleasures, in their drives. And then you can get them on board for your, depraved satanic agenda.
Hmm. Yeah. Ego, another one of those sins that we try to avoid. All definitions of words, like everything else, are relative. Definition is to a major degree dependent upon your partisan position. Your leader is always flexible. He has pride in the dignity of his cause. He is unflinching, sincere, and ingenious tactician fighting the good fight, playing 5D chess. To the opposition, he is unprincipled and will go whichever way the wind blows. His arrogance is masked by a fake humility. He is dogmatically stubborn, a hypocrite, unscrupulous, and unethical, and he will do anything to win. He is leading the forces of evil. To one side, he is a demigod, to the other, a demagogue. Nowhere is the relativity of a definition more germane in the arena of life than the word ego. Anyone who is working against the haves is always facing odds, and in many cases, heavy odds. If he or she does not have that complete self confidence, or call it ego, that he can win, then the battle is lost before it has even begun. I have seen so called trained organizers go out to another city with an assignment of organizing a community of approximately 100,000 people, take one look, and promptly wire in a resignation. To be able to look at a community of people and say to yourself, I will organize them in so many weeks. I will take on the corporations, the press, and anything else, is to be a real organizer. Ego, as we understand and use it here, cannot be even vaguely confused with, nor is it remotely related to, egotism. No would be organizer afflicted with egotism can avoid hiding this from the people with whom he is working. No contrived humility can conceal it. Nothing antagonizes people and alienates them from a would be organizer more than the revealing flashes of arrogance, vanity, impatience, and contempt of a personal egotism. The ego of the organizer is strong and more monumental than the ego of the leader. The leader is driven by the desire for power, while the organizer is driven by the desire to create. The organizer is, in a true sense, reaching for the highest level for which man can reach, to create, to be a great creator, to play God. And in
What? Wait, hold on a second. That's so funny because he's like, this is how I experienced reading this earlier today. He was like, look, if you're an organizer, you got to keep your ego in check. If you show up to organize the people and they sense that you think you're better than them, it ain't going to work. The politician is an egomaniac, but the organizer keeps his ego in check. But then also, you're God. What?
yeah, yeah, it when I was listening to the audiobook sitting outside with my chickens earlier, and when it came to this part, the first thing that popped into my head was Protestantism, because of the protest right? I mean, that's what Protestantism comes from, is it's a protest against the Roman Catholic Church. And I was thinking, I was like, I had gotten in a conversation with my dad a few weeks ago, and we were talking about why I had stopped going to church whenever I was when I was a Protestant. And I said, "Well, Dad, it's very simple." I was like, when every man in the church is his own pope and is interpreting the Bible in his own way, therefore making himself a pope, it's only one step to becoming your own God. And my mom and dad both looked at me like, "Oh crap." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, if there's no authority, if there's not an authority structure, if I'm the one making the rules, then what's to stop me from making myself my own God in in the wake of Protestantism?" And so I was like, so therefore, but when I found Orthodoxy, I saw a legitimate authority and hierarchy that was necessary. And so, yeah, I was like, that's that. And so this works great for the Western mind, because this is how the Western mind like conceives of everything. It's like we're all creating. Everyone in the West has made themselves their own God in some way, shape, or form.
This reminds me of a fake quote that I made up a couple of days ago. Every man is his own Ayatollah, Donald Trump.
It's apocryphal, if nothing else. An infection of egotism would make it impossible to respect the dignity of individuals, to understand people, or to strive to develop the other elements that make up the ideal organizer. Egotism is mainly a defensive reaction of feelings of personal inadequacy. Ego is a positive conviction and belief in one's ability, with no need for egotistical behavior. Ego moves on every level. How can an organizer respect the dignity of an individual if he does not respect his own dignity? How can he believe in people if he does not really believe in himself? How can he convince people that they have it within themselves, that they have the power to stand up to win, if he does not believe it of himself? Ego must be so all pervading that the personality of the organizer is contagious, that it converts the people from despair to defiance, creating a mass ego. Conflict. Conflict is another bad word in the general opinion. This is a consequence of two influences in our society. One influence is organized religion, which has espoused a rhetoric of turning the other cheek and has quoted the scriptures as the devil never would have dared, because of their major previous function of supporting the establishment. The second influence is probably the most subversive and insidious one, and it has permeated the American scene in the last generation. That is Madison Avenue public relations middle class moral hygiene, which has made of conflict or controversy something negative and undesirable. This has all been part of an advertising culture that emphasizes getting along with people and avoiding friction. If you look at our television commercials, you get the picture that American society is largely devoted to ensuring that no odors come from our mouths or armpits. Consensus is a keynote. One must not offend one's fellow man. And so today we find that people in the mass media are fired for expressing their opinions or being controversial. In the churches, they are fired for the same reason, but the words used there are lacking in prudence. And on university campuses, faculty members are fired for the same reason, but the words used there are personality difficulties. Conflict is the essential core of a free and open society. If one were to project the democratic way of life in the form of a musical score, its major theme would be the harmony of dissonance. I'm so surprised he didn't quote Thomas Jefferson's watering the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants in there. Like I mean, that's all he's missing, right? So that is that chapter.
Well done.
Well done. Yes, we have made it through the end of the what is it, the word of words, whatever it's
A
called.
word on words.
Word on words, a word on words. Yeah, a word
It's
about words.
it's so funny because now he's like, the last chapter he was focusing so much on morality and or ethics, and that's in this chapter. But then he's also getting into linguistics,
Hmm.
and it's just that feeling that I'm getting that he's like he's claiming that there's no uh, at some level there's no objective reality or there's no objective truth, but he's simultaneously claiming that there is an objective reality and there is an objective truth, and he has it, and that's like his under. He's got his priors, as you would call it. He's got his metaphysics
Hmm.
that he's not like explicitly laying out, but that's always in the background of what he's saying. So he's
Well,
like,
from a Christian perspective, you could say truth is a person, right? So truth is Christ. And what he's saying is, I am truth. So he's made himself a god, like we were just talking about, and like I was talking about earlier, he is justifying his contradictions and hypocrisies instead of repenting.
well said.
So I can tell you, man, it's it's been such a transition for me over the last 4 years since joining the church. The way that my mindset has changed and the way that I see the world and see patterns. But I feel like I have a better understanding of what I'm looking at it through a Christian and specifically Orthodox Christian lens than I did when I was trying to make sense of the world through a secular lens, whether that be through conservatism, which I was more of a conservative um, when I got out of the military, or through libertarianism, or through paleoconservatism. Um, as my mindset shifts, and I don't have the correct Orthodox phronema. I am definitely not a teacher of any sort. I'm just a man that has opinions and tries to make sense of the world. But as my mindset shifts, I feel like I have a better understanding of human nature than I ever have before in my life.
What is that word, frenema?
Phronema is it's a Greek word. It just means mindset. It's the way you think. It's there's a book called The Orthodox Mind by Dr. Janine Constantinou. I hope I said her last name right. I always struggle with her last name, but it's called the Orthodox. I think it's the Orthodox Mind, and it just and that's the term she uses for thinking like an Orthodox Christian. She uses the term phronema, and it's a very common term in Orthodox circles to utilize that word because it's more like it encapsulates more than just your mindset. It also encapsulates your priors too.
Nice.
Yeah. So so I don't know. I just think, like I said, I just think I've gotten a little bit better at recognizing the nature of humanity from this perspective. And I could be wrong. That's always
Well, I
possible.
think experiencing your perspective, it's very powerful. And like I said before, like reading this book by myself, I would not have experienced it this way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have seen these different, I would have seen certain things, certain data points, but I wouldn't have seen the bigger patterns and those like the underlying priors and the metaphysics that are emerging.
Yeah.
And I would have been more confused because he seems confused.
Mm.
And I wouldn't have had that language to say, oh, he's trying to justify his contradictions instead of repenting for his inequities.
Yeah.
And he's dragging me into that. And I can sense it, but I can't articulate it.
Mm.
Now I can.
Yeah. Well, man, you got any other closing thoughts?
Just that. This is getting good. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see where this goes.
I'm enjoying this. We have, like I said, I think next week we might be able to pull off two chapters
Let's
because
do it.
looking at the audiobook, they're only, I mean, I've listened to it, but I haven't like broken it down chapter by chapter the way way I'm doing it now. And looking at the audiobook, today's was a 30-minute, it was 31 minutes. And next week is an 18-minute and a 19-minute. And I think if we can knock out 31 minutes, we
Oh,
can,
most definitely.
yeah, we can do 37.
Yeah, we'll
So,
crush that.
you know what I failed to do the last few times we've recorded is I have failed to have you plug your podcast.
Well,
And you should be advertising that. You had one of my good friends on a couple of weeks ago. You had Matthew Ho on, who's
yes,
a
I
really
did.
good. I was texting with him yesterday.
Love Matthew Ho. Yeah, I had a great conversation with him. My podcast is called Anarchic Areopagita, and I just launched it last year. I've only had uh, 3 episodes, but being in the institute circles, like I just have access to amazing guests. So I've interviewed Barry Eisler, former CIA officer and current best-selling novelist, Keith Knight of our institute, and then most recently Matthew Ho.
Yeah.
Um, Looking to get the great Tommy Salmons on soon.
Yes, we will
Um,
definitely work that out.
and
Let me get through Lent. We got a Holy Week coming up next week, and so
first things first, 100%.
yes, yes,
But yeah, I'm really excited to be um, interviewing uh, just really knowledgeable and great people, um, but all sorts of topics I'm looking to get into, but definitely, centering on politics and geopolitics and social stuff.
yeah,
Um, and the thing that I've really has been great about it is just after doing each interview, I feel like I've learned so much and I'm so inspired, and my thinking has just gotten a lot sharper. And then I just think, wow, like, guys like Tom Woods and yourself and Scott Horton, who've done so many interviews, and how that's really part of like the sharpening of your guys' thinking and your knowledge base. And I can just sort of like model, you know, you being interviewed on another podcast, being asked a question about some subject, and your mind is automatically going to like conversations you've had with some of like the most expert people on those specific subjects.
yeah.
And not just like having the knowledge, but having like a feel for those patterns of discourse. So it's been really exciting. Check it out on YouTube, Anarchic Areopagita.
One of my favorite moments of any time I've ever been interviewed was my good friend Jason Marinchuk asked me a question uh, about Russia and the political atmosphere in Russia during the war between Russia and Ukraine, and I was like, I don't really have an opinion on that. I know nothing about their politics. He was just like, okay, well, most people will just say something. You were just like, I don't know. It was
That's not
funny.
going to fly on MSNBC. You better make
Yeah.
something up, boy.
You got to get Jim Jotras on your show too to talk Russia, Ukraine. Jim is
Oh, hell yeah.
incredible. But all right, man. Well, I'm going to shut down this recording. I got to eat. I'm hungry. And I think my wife made shrimp and grits.
Oh, that's